professor like me has to make the big bucks, right? If a professor like me has to make the big bucks, what does he or she need to do, right? I think the core aspect is to understand that there are many more options today. Earlier, what used to happen was that they used to say those who can do and those who can't teach, right? But in today's day and age, I think those boundaries have been blurred. So today, I think what we can discuss is if professors really want to build their own ventures, you know, how should they go about building their own personal brand?
In the last few years, professor-led startups at leading institutes like IITs, IIScs, BITS, Pilani, etc., they've grown by a rate of around 20 to 30% year on year. So nearly 40% of the 120 startups supported by the Foundation for Science, Innovation and Development Deep Tech Incubator of IISc are led or co-founded by faculty members. There are success stories like Ather Energy, where IIT Madras's incubation center was the first to invest in the recently IPO'd startup, and it saw a return of 50 crores. IIT Madras incubation has a startup survival rate of 80%. There are stories like Agnikul Cosmos, ePlane, Pure EV that are doing admirably well in their niches. Another startup, Algorithmic Biologics, which was started after COVID-19, and it's a molecular diagnostic startup founded by Professor Manoj Gopalakrishnan from IIT Mumbai, has generated a revenue of 3.87 million. Now, with these success stories and the growing niche of IP heavy deep tech and green tech startups, especially backed by the government schemes and funds like Bharat Innovation, has increased the venture capitalist interest in professor led startups in India. So now, more than ever, this question of Saraswati versus Lakshmi has been brought to the forefront. And it's time the scholars of this country begin realizing the potential of their research is beyond just the lab. With this, I say let's open our discussion. And you, as someone who's been both a professor as well as an entrepreneur, I would love to hear your take on this trend.
I think I've been a bit of an exception, Janavi, wherein I used to let Saraswati bring Lakshmi to me. So I think that used to help me a lot, because I believe that now the time has come. I was probably a bit of an exception, wherein I was a professor and I was an entrepreneur as well. But that was because I was an entrepreneur first, who then ventured into professor land. So I was already bitten by the entrepreneurial bug, and I was having some success with it. So clearly, when I became a professor, which was purely out of interest and love for teaching, I realized that I could also do a lot of crazy things, which I tried out in various institutes that I worked with. But now I think what has really happened is that the space has become ripe for professors to start their own ventures. One of the aspects that you mentioned, which was very critical, is that they all seem to be technical or technologically driven case studies or professors. And I think that's really critical for us to understand, because it might mean that they have a patent to their name or they're really technically sound and stuff like that. I haven't seen too many management professors or marketing professors case studies being written about. They might still be working under the radar, but it's quite likely that there's more of the tech bro element over here, even in professors. The second thing that I thought would be really critical, and we can have, I can delve more into my own personal experience, is building a story or a personal brand is absolutely critical for a professor. But the way in which you might have to do it, if your full-time job is with an institute, you need to be a little careful about that too. So because you're serving various stakeholders, you're serving students, you're serving administrators, and you're serving investors, and they are all they all come to your LinkedIn page, maybe if you're a professor, and should not really find a dichotomy in what they see over there. So we will explore that a little bit, but I'm wondering what's going on in your head right now.
Yeah, I would like to delve further into the first point that you said, that there are not many professors in, say, the management field, or So, could this possibly be because a professor is, or anybody in the research field is supposed to be the product guy? Now, when it comes to the management person, there is no product per se. There is only an expertise or a skill that they bring to the table, which is something that the students of their students or the MBAs of the world, they already are foraying into it or taking it further. So do you think this disparity of management professors not having their own startups is because they don't have a product to sell?
That's such an interesting thing. Well, I think that they don't have an imagination. And I'll tell you why. Because I think that they could very well be looking for product guys, right? They could very well be looking for product-led students and try and do some venture with them. But for that, you need to keep your ego out of the door, because if you're a professor, then clearly there is a different relationship that you have with students if you're a normal professor. So what will happen is that then you will expect some kowtowing by the student for the professor. And if the student has the product and you're saying, oh, I bring you these management skills or marketing skills, that is not going to go down very well, especially in today's day and age, because students think that they can A, do without professors a lot of times, and B, even if they like a professor, they've liked the professor in class. So it's quite likely that that relationship may not go beyond the class into something which is like a working relationship. They might find the professor very tedious and very boring and very pedantic, to actually do a business with. And they think, because there's I'd like to ask you this question, because you're always thinking, okay, that is a class, and then there's the real world. Can you maybe elaborate a bit on that?
Yeah. So when we started working together, obviously, even in my mind, there was a bit of a reluctance, because I had seen you as a professor. I did not know about your entrepreneurial background. So you're absolutely right. It's that in-class persona, that theoretical mindset that we see. People like us who are just in class for those 2 years or 3 years, we have this thing in our head that was this guy might be outdated because they're still teaching us Kotler, which was written 30 years ago. Right? So if what they're teaching us is not applicable in the real world, how could their skills be applicable in the real world? So I think this is where the researchers might have a bit of a pull, because what they're researching might not even be relevant today, but it will be relevant 20 years from now. So their skill in itself is very revolutionary. But now coming to where we started working together, right? The skills that you bring to the table are much more practical than me.
Okay.
Right? The way you see the world, because you are able to see from both sides of the coin.
Yeah.
From the theoretical aspects as well as from the practical industry version. And I have realized that I am learning 90% from you, from more than I did in class, right? So this is where I think the disparity lies.
I think Jahnavi is first of all making a couple of points which I need to refute. I did not teach Kotler in class. And second thing she's saying is, listen, boss, I think your classes are okay, but I think you're probably a little bit better as an entrepreneur. So now the weird thing is that I would tend to agree with your second point. And I think that the reason why I would tend to agree is because I've been an entrepreneur first, I've always connected to industry, right? And professors don't do that. So most professors are caught up in their cocoon, and unless and until they're technology driven, they're not going to actually build something which can be of tremendous value to the outside world. So I think the first thing which we have to note is that a professor, if he or she wants to be an entrepreneur, they have to go beyond papers.
Right.
I would say it the other way around. So you can write a paper or two, which can, even if you're in management or marketing or whatever, which can talk about your wonderful model or your wonderful piece of code or whatever it is. But what you have to do is, for building a personal brand, you have to go offline and consult with industry, or be an active player in industry, because that actually allows students to look at you in a very different light. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think you tell me, actually, I think that takes a lot of mindset shift to come out of that professorship cocoon. Could this be because a professor is considered as a job, and research as considered as a career or as a life, which is why the deep tech researchers are able to bring out their product, while the professors of management or marketing or whatever still see themselves as people who are doing a job of teaching?
So normally, anybody who's in the academics field, their work is divided into research and teaching. Some people have a balanced approach. Some people actually go for teaching first, and some people go for research first. In India, teaching is celebrated, but across the world, and a lot of Indian institutes of late are celebrating research more than teaching, because you are contributing to core knowledge. Now, my feeling is that if you're looking at research, then you need to be able to do research in a way that is genuinely going to add value to industry, which a lot of research, academic research, doesn't. I mean, I'm being absolutely open over here. Most of academic research is peer. They're going for their peer acceptance and reviews, and the whole system is built like that. And without getting too much into the criticism of that system, it doesn't encourage them to be entrepreneurs unless and until they've built a widget which is going to actually change the world. So then about the teachers themselves, even teachers, as you said, they can teach outdated theories and subjects and the rest of it, unless and until they're consultants, or they have got some relevant experience, or they are maybe influencers, or something like that. So you need to be able to touch base with the marketplace and get feedback and actually let that inform your teaching and stuff like that. But Janavi, what I wanted to say was that it's not only the students who are the only like stakeholders over here, because it's also the investors, right? It's also the investors, and it's also sometimes the schools themselves, because institutions sometimes have their own in-house venture funding or stuff
Yeah.
like that. So you have these stakeholders, and the professor becomes pivotal over here, because a question that an investor will have is, okay, so suppose I invest money in you, are you going to leave your cushy full-time job, right? Are you going to do this, or are you just an advisory? Then is the student going to run? But I find that student immature. How is it going to actually happen, and stuff like that, right? So there are a lot of issues which can happen with full-time professors. What will work is with a lot of adjunct and visiting faculty who are anyways connected, and I'm one of them. Had a full-time job earlier, but I'm one of them. So you can then play with your time. You can also play with the fact that you're not a full-time job holder and the rest of it. But this story, all of it has to be communicated, and it cannot be communicated directly. Because if you're crass about it, then you become a bit of a pushy salesperson. So you need to craft your story in a way that people understand that, hey, you're available, you've got fantastic ideas, you have got the ability to network, you've got the ability to actually spot bright sparks in your students, as well as ideas and stuff like that. And you can kind of build it together and play a meaningful role in an emerging company. And for most professors, this is a very daunting thing to do.
Yeah, agreed. I think this is where professors need to get out of their professor gives me a theoretical edge to being a professor means people know I have something to say.
Yeah.
Now, if you see on LinkedIn, whenever you see a professor's post, at least I immediately read it,
Yeah.
because I know this person must be coming from somewhere, somewhere factual, has
Okay.
something knowledgeable to say.
Hmm.
Now, when you're shaping your personal brand, it is very important to come out with this persona that, boss, I know what I'm saying. I
Hmm.
have been teaching that, and so I since the last 20-30 years, I might be teaching that to the students, or I might be teaching that to the companies. Now, if I can teach it, I can do it, right?
Hmm.
So
Because I've done it, I can teach it. Is probably the way to look at it. Yeah, absolutely. Okay.
yeah. So
Yeah.
I think this is the step one of getting out of your cocoon and leveraging the fact that you have been a professor since a very long time, that you have been researching about something since a very long time, that you are not competing with the guys who think in numbers, that you are actually facilitating an industry or a product or a sector or a revolution that those guys who think in number can take it forward to, they say 10x, 20x kind of returns. And I think this is what VCs are in the end looking for. At the end of the day, what they want is the returns, right? And if you keep on banking on the people who run those Swiggies and Zomatos of this world, if you look at the quick commerce industry, there are 6-7 players playing on the exact same model, doing the exact same thing, working in the same industry, just competing on, do I deliver in 10 minutes or 7 minutes,
Yes.
right? Now look at the kind of startups that are being run by professors, or at least being advised on by the professors. They are revolutionizing the industry. There is deep tech. The AI was started by a professor. Forget everything else. If you look at the olden times, right, Chanakya being a professor, he brought about one of the most powerful kings of the world at that time,
Yes.
simply as a professor,
Yes.
right? So there is definitely a story over here.
No, there is a lot of stories over here, and you can choose a lot of story arcs as well. I mean, the Chanakya thing that you said is very powerful, because then what you can recognize the professor's role in a fledgling startup is that he or she is the kingmaker or the queen maker, right? So if you look at the way in which, okay, so that is what the role can be like. Here's an interesting thing. So I was just putting together the pieces of the puzzle in my head, and what I realized was that you have to do a lot of things offline if you want to build stuff. Like, for example, when a professor is teaching a class, he has to communicate a story in the class that allows the bright sparks to actually say, okay, I need to talk to this man or woman about something which is really of interest to me. And this happens, by the way, this definitely happens. But you can't, again, do it in a crass way. It has to be based upon what you're teaching, and there is a fine line. I mean, you can't suddenly start hawking your services in the middle of a classroom. So that is one. The second thing is, whenever a professor is actually being a consultant to an industry, he or she has to create an aura around themselves which allows them to be understood as people who are brimming with ideas and imagination and stuff like that. So again, there is an offline component here. And the best thing, I mean, in Mica it's chota, but the best thing about a professor and student relationship is that you can have informal discussions with students. You can have informal discussions that can lead to various, and a lot of these can be organic. And I have done a variety of connections organically with students outside of class, wherein we are having a cup of tea, and we are just discussing what can be and what can't be, and normally it tends to work out. Here's another thing: you have to also figure out what are the opportunities within your institute
Hmm.
that allow for such collaborations to happen. So professor has to be very careful about these offline things. Forget the what he's or she's saying on LinkedIn. Forget
Yeah.
about that. You have to kind of manage this whole thing. But let me ask you a question, Janavi.
Yeah.
So you were reluctant because I was a professor, and I believe that I think we probably only met online. We
Yeah.
didn't, because I haven't really taught you a class in real life.
Yeah.
So what changed your perception about working with a professor? Forget me, but what changed your perception? What was happening? So
Okay, yeah. Before we had started, actually, this reluctance came when I heard your name. Okay, he's the co-founder of X,
yeah,
right?
okay.
Yeah. So when we started working together, the kind of ideas that you had, the kind of conversations that we were doing, and the
Okay.
practical aspects, everything that you spoke of was very, very practical, was very industry oriented, and that made me realize, okay, it's not just theoretical, boss. It's not just on podcasts.
Hmm.
This guy actually,
So here's the interesting thing. It's not just about podcasts. Meant that you knew that I had done podcasts, right?
yeah,
Which meant that there was a personal brand that was
yes,
built around a certain premise. Now,
yes.
so that had connected to at a subconscious level before our interaction, wherein you said, okay, I now confirm. So that's step two of the customer journey, or the stakeholder journey in that case, right? So there is that spark, and now you're saying, oh, there is some practicality as well. So okay, tick tick tick. Okay,
Yeah.
so maybe this can work. So this is exactly how students and professors also behave, right? So when professors are looking at students, they a lot of times they're looking at it, okay, is he or she really interested in this, or are they interested in a job? Because they have taken a loan, they have to pay off that loan, and maybe it is the way it is. The second thing could be, okay, are they really interested? So there is a story that even students have to create if they're interested in professor backed startups.
Agree.
And now you have to think in terms of maybe putting that story on LinkedIn for these personas.
Yeah.
And this is where the magic happens. So you again have to look at your journey. You have to look at where LinkedIn will play a role, or X will play a role, or whatever, Instagram will play a role. You have to really communicate your story strongly offline, even before you think of ventures. I mean, that's where I would put it.
No, that's absolutely true. I mean, your name or your what you have to say, it should come much before you step into that room with a VC, or
Hmm.
much before you pitch your idea to any student or any co-founder or anybody else, right? So obviously the online channels like the podcasts and LinkedIn is absolutely crucial. And when you come to the offline, now there are these mixers for startup
Yes.
founders, or right. Most of the mostly in these mixers, the people that you see are wannabe founders or present founders. You don't really see many of professors over there.
Yes, that's correct.
Now imagine a professor in a deep tech company, deep tech product, researching on a deep tech product, going into one of these mixers or one of these conferences and finding a professor of marketing over there and gelling immediately, and
Yeah.
then they start co-founding something. Now
Okay.
you have a skill, you have both sides of the skill set over here.
No, I understand what you're saying. I really doubt this is going to happen. I'll tell you why. Because professors have massive egos, right? So when they're going to talk to other professors, they're just going to keep shouting at each other, or they're going to write nasty mails to each other, because they're going to go back to the same jobs and fight as colleagues or something like that. So it might be tough for two professors. Maybe in other institutes, okay, that might be more of a possibility. But I think also mixers are places where everybody's trying to sell to each other,
Hmm.
right? So what is happening is that, oh, this is my card, this is my card, and it's like, actually, okay, so, and I would probably be tempted to say that it's quite likely that maybe the era of mixers is kind of diminishing. Okay, and it is kind of shifting towards a new kind of more invisible networking that may be of more benefit to even professors, students, or any other stakeholder. My feeling specifically about this is that the professor needs to really understand his or her area of expertise, and build thought leadership around that. right? So if my area, like for example, is around storytelling or marketing or whatever, then I will build that stuff without really trying to say, oh, build a product with me or build a venture with me, because that is not going to work. That probably will work, in class or outside of class or with an institute and stuff like that.
Yeah, but here's the question. At the end of the day, the professor or any startup that is at least very heavy in technology needs a VC funding.
Yes.
If you are creating your story in class, it's not necessarily translating to a funding pitch or even getting you into the room with a VC.
Hmm.
Right now, one question here is, let's take a step back. You talk a lot about the professor's ego,
Hmm.
right? So I want to understand, where does this ego come from, and how does it translate into them, lagging behind when it comes to their entrepreneurial ventures?
I think professors have the ability to think theoretically and in abstract methods, and there are a lot of times they're in love with their theories, frameworks, and ideas. So they find them very concrete, and because they are finding them very concrete, they uh, invest a lot of their personality, their identity into those ideas, because they know that either they've contributed to a model, or they've created a framework, or they really have loved some other person's framework and they find it really useful across life. Um, and I think that is what builds their ego, right? But I want to bring a different aspect to your thing about investors. People need investment. Not necessarily not necessarily you can start something on a smaller scale and you have to build it up till product market fit, when it will scale up. So what a professor actually needs are students or other collaborators who are able to take it to market, because I don't think a professor is going to be able to do justice to that aspect, especially if they have a full-time job. So it's quite likely that the dynamics of the team are dependent upon how you're creating that whole space for team collaboration and stuff like that. If I'm looking at investors, the story for the investors comes with a team,
Hmm.
right? Professor cannot go unless and until he or she has a patent, right?
Yeah.
Value that is being created already, cannot go and create a story which is going to convince an investor. Ye chhodega apna, all of that stuff will happen.
So, do you think that not a professor not being able to take their product into market is simply because they don't actually go to the market? Like,
Mm,
for example, when I was one of the previous companies that I was working for in the industrial product segment, so I was very often frequently working with the R&D people,
yeah.
and they had lovely ideas of what could work, what could not work. Technically, obviously, they were very sound, but their ideas were amazing.
Mm.
The only thing that was missing was that, is this needed now, or is this needed 10 years from now, or how can you make it good for product market fit? And the simplest solution that I could think of was, why don't you have stints for R&D people where they go to market with the sales folks every month,
I
once
think
every month?
absolutely well said. A lot of times, and I've been guilty of it as well. Professors are, or people who are like slightly ahead of their time tend to become professors, okay, because they're always thinking in future. So which means that they're not connected to practicalities or market realities. And what I think is really critical is for them to pair up or partner up with somebody who recognizes their value but has the ability to translate that value into the marketplace with whatever their skills or whatever they're bringing to the table. I think that will complete the sort of picture.
Hmm. Right. So, as a standalone person,
Mm.
before you find a team member, because even for finding the team member, the other person should, unless of course they are your student or they belong to the same institute or a circle, the chances of which are very rare,
Mm.
they need to be able to understand that your ideas go beyond just the theory. Even before, I mean, you can't go through a research paper and see that this prototype will work. They will
Absolutely.
have to see your ideas, especially when it comes to the non-tech sector. So now it comes brings us to the personal branding kind of an angle. What kind of arcs that a professor can build, or what channels do you think the professor should explore to be able to give out their technical expertise in the fields of tech or non-tech sectors, to tap into that kind of person who would become their co-founder tomorrow?
I think the core aspect is to, whenever you're creating a personal brand or story, you have to kind of communicate this subtly, that you have the ability to create magic but in a practical way, right? So you're a practical magician, perhaps
Yeah.
is a great persona, or an archetype. So if a professor comes across as a total sage, he or she is not going to succeed, because it will be a waste of time, especially for Gen Zers. I don't know about millennials like you, Janavi, but definitely for Gen Zers, they will look at it as a waste of time and space. I think it's also a question of energy. And I think that a professor perhaps needs to demonstrate that energy by doing videos, by doing a lot of stuff which actually allows for their aura to be communicated beyond the classroom. So there's a lot of things there, and I'm sure that we can definitely help a few high profile professors and their student teams to build their stories and take them to market. But these are some of the starting blocks.
So, if you're a professor and you're looking to turn your years of research into a profitable venture, maybe it's time to look at beyond just your lab. Maybe it's time to build your persona in such a way that you can attract the kind of people who understand that you're not just thinking in terms of technology or formulas and equations or frameworks, rather, but actually in terms of returns and values and the 10x growth that people who love taking things to market or people who love backing ideas that would sustain for the next 50, 60 years like to back.
My insight is that students are very judgmental, yeah. And what I think we need to figure out as professors is to understand that your aura is not going to take you across and take you to becoming a billionaire like Sergey Brin and what's his name,
Yeah.
at Google, who are doing their PhDs. They got their professor in and gave that professor a stake because that he allowed them to actually build their whole idea out, right? So my feeling is that if you look at the most important thing that a professor has to do is to understand that the moment the professor steps out of the classroom, he or she will be judged by the student in terms of energy, in terms of practicality, and in terms of everything else that comes their way. So I think that that becomes absolutely critical for a professor to become, part of a successful startup.